I'm Megan Gleason.
I'm Dan Boyd.
Welcome to Rounding Out the Roundhouse.
If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.
Well, we've officially hit the third week of the legislative session. It only feels like 3 months, but a lot going on. We're starting to get a few bills actually making it to the House and Senate floors and some action on bills. Nothing has made its way to the governor yet, other than the feed bill, which kind of pays for the session expenses. But it seems like we're starting to, see bills starting to move through their second or third, in some case, committees.
Yeah, and I'm almost a little surprised at the pace. I feel like when we started, everybody was saying like it's going to be go, 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 and it has been go, 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 but we are only beginning to start to see bills hit the floor, which I maybe would have expected a little earlier this year with a rush to get everything through.
Yeah, it seems like a few bills have kind of moved fast at the beginning and then maybe gotten a little bogged down with amendments or, questions or changes to the bill, which is kind of typical, but maybe kind of get stuck in the grind a little bit. And I know leadership had talked going into the session about hoping to have some crime bills and a behavioral health package to the governor's desk by the 30-day point. And that's looking a little iffy since we're, I think next week it would be the halfway point of the session, and whether those bills can get through committee and then get through the other chamber, as they would have to before getting to the governor's desk remains unclear. But it's always one thing to have a good plan going into the session and another thing then to try to execute it.
Yeah, and it was a little ambitious of a timeline too, I think, considering all of the new legislators who are still kind of trying to learn how everything works, and you don't have the votes quite pinned down as you maybe would have in the past with legislators voting on bills that they've seen before. So I think there are a few factors to consider on why it's taking a bit longer.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, one package I mentioned, this crime package, we are expecting to find out by as soon as tomorrow, kind of which bills will be kind of rolled into this omnibus bill, as they like to call it at the legislature, which basically means that they take these different individual bills and roll them all into one package. So we've seen a few different bills dealing, for example, dealing with fentanyl trafficking penalties. There was one yesterday about blood samples from DWI stops for drug driving. Obviously, the criminal competency piece has gotten a lot of discussion about how individuals who are in the court system and if they're deemed competent or not and how they're kind of treated. So we're going to find out hopefully soon. I've been bugging them to see exactly which bills are going to make the cut for this package. It sounds like House Bill 8 will be the vehicle for that, which is kind of a bill that was just filed, which is kind of interesting. So keep an eye out for that. And then we should have some, I think once those bills are all rolled out and they unveil this package, it could move forward kind of quickly since a lot of these bills have already had individual hearings, in committee.
Yeah. So what's the benefit of rolling it all into a package like that?
Yeah, I think that, they've done that increasingly in recent years. They've done a few tax kind of packages as well, and also done some previous crime packages. So I think, they would say that way they can hear all these bills, but then put it all into one, and it makes it a little easier to, especially when you get to the House floor, you don't have to have multiple 3-hour debates on bills. You can just have it all in one bill, and have an up or down vote on these proposals. It does put members sometimes in a tricky position that you might like some things that are in the package, but not like other things. And so you have to kind of make that balance. I know some Republicans have said that they were feeling some pressure to include gun bills in the crime package, which they were opposed to and said that would be maybe a deal breaker for them. So I haven't heard yet for sure whether any of these gun bills will end up in the crime package, but those are the kind of, I think, dynamics, and I think ideally, they're able to get some bipartisan support, but kind of depends how aggressive they want to be and how many bills they want to try to fit into one of these packages. So.
Yeah. So kind of like the tax package where that's something, you've got to pass, but there's a lot of things in there people don't agree with, but, you have to compromise.
Right. And I think, leadership is hoping that the things you like in those bills kind of outweigh and the things you don't like, and you maybe hold your nose a little bit when you voting yes on some of those things. So that's certainly one. That the behavioral health package as well, that's in Senate Finance Committee. It sounds like it could come up as soon as tomorrow in Finance Committee, and then it would go to the Senate floor. They're making a few changes to that bill, but these are the two kind of pieces, the Senate doing the behavioral health side and the House doing the crime side. And then the plan is for those to kind of cross over and, then move forward to the governor's desk. She did say last week she's not fully on board with the behavioral health package. So that kind of remains to be seen whether they make some changes there. And then I think whether the crime package is, to her liking is another big thing we'll be watching. And obviously with the special session last year and some of those kind of lingering tensions, and she has supported some of these individual bills they've talked about dealing with crime. But when that final package comes out, we'll have to see whether the fourth floor is in support as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before, but the pressure is really on this year to pass some crime and behavioral health initiatives, especially after that 5-hour special session. So I think even if people maybe disagree, if legislators don't like the whole package, there is a lot of pressure from constituents to get it through.
Yeah, I'm moving on. I know you've been doing some reporting on kind of tariffs and some of the federal issues, things like that. I mean, that debate has also kind of hit the Roundhouse. I did a story yesterday on the House Democrats had a news conference on affordability issues and consumer prices. They really kind of blamed the Trump administration for driving up prices, and they unveiled some of their bills for expanding kind of these targeted tax credits. On the other side, Republicans are proposing totally eliminating the state's personal income tax, which would be a more drastic approach, could cost in the neighborhood of $2 billion per year. But their argument would be that would create more economic activity, make the state a more desirable place. So we're seeing both sides kind of taking up this issue of consumer prices and inflation and trying to make things easier for New Mexicans, but taking a different solutions to try to accomplish that. And it is interesting when you see these national debates and how they kind of play out as well in the Roundhouse.
Yeah, and I have been a little surprised this year that we haven't heard more talk about the Trump administration. So, I mean, tying it into things like expensive groceries or inflation, it definitely makes sense why you would want to go about tax cuts. But I talked with economist Kelly O'Donnell the other day about this, and kind of both Democrats and Republicans are trying to target taxes this year. And she thinks with all of the uncertainty on a federal level that maybe that's not the best idea, that we need to keep saving money, which the legislature has done a lot in the past. We have a lot more permanent funds than we used to. But she said now is not the time. If the Trump administration is going to claw back federal funding, we don't have the money to spend right now on tax cuts.
Yeah, and this debate over do tax cuts generate more economic activity is not a new one at the Roundhouse. I mean, that's been going on for years, certainly during Governor Bill Richardson's administration and Susana Martinez's administration. That was a debate as well. I asked the House Speaker Javier Martinez yesterday, why not kind of broader tax cuts or rebates, given the state's revenue situation. And he said, paraphrasing, but the millionaires have had enough tax cuts over the last decades, and New Mexico really needs to target this tax relief at working class families and folks like that. So I think that's kind of a similar debate that's playing out on Capitol Hill a little bit as well with the Trump administration. And now you get issues like price of eggs and things like that I think both sides are kind of trying to turn into, political capital a little bit.
Yeah, and I think while we're on this topic, the important thing to mention is New Mexico's reliance, the state budget reliance on oil and gas. With the boom and bust cycle for the past couple of years, we've seen a huge budget really because of oil and gas revenues. And that's why legislators are looking now at implementing some of these tax initiatives while we have the money. At the same time, it's not always a boom. It's a bust, and you can never really predict with 100% certainty when a bust is going to come around.
Yeah, and that gets into, I know we've talked on the podcast before about these idea of trust funds as well. And that's certainly in the mix as well, with the behavioral health issue, talking about trust funds. But I think increasingly they've turned to this trust fund idea instead of something like rebates, saying, let's put some of this money, set it aside for future use when oil prices do drop, whenever that may be. Certainly history has showed us that there is always a bust after such a boom. And this has been a pretty long boom that we've been experiencing. But, at some point it does seem like it's going to level off or go down again.
Yeah, and it is a finite resource. So while technology is advancing and maybe helping us get a little more oil than we used to be able to, it will not be there forever.
One other thing to mention, 3 weeks into the session, there is still a vacant House seat, which is kind of, I think some people have almost forgotten that that seat still hasn't been filled, but this is House District 6, which is Representative Eliseo Alcon's old seat. I did do a story. There now have been 2 names submitted to the governor. Former Senator Clemente Sanchez is one, and then a former Cibola County Commissioner, Martha Garcia, is the other. So the governor's office said they're setting up interviews, hoping to fill this seat soon, which I think residents of that district would certainly like to see, given that we're approaching the halfway point of the session. The Navajo Nation president even weighed in and urged the governor to pick one of the candidates who is Navajo. And so kind of another dynamic there. But I think this is dragged out longer than a lot of people expected. And it's kind of unique having so long, so much time having passed this session without having that seat filled.
And that, it can seem like there's a lot of members on the House floor, but one vote really can make or break a bill. Like we saw with paid family medical leave last year, which died on the House by 2 votes. It really is important to have everybody filling those seats.
No, that's a good point. And especially with more of these bills starting to get to the House floor now, and in committee as well. One vote in a 10-member committee can swing things. So I think there is some hope that seat is filled soon, and this drama can be put to bed for now. So there are a few bills just to keep an eye on the House floor. We don't know for sure if they are going to take those up today or in the next few days. One dealing with expanding the state's red flag gun law and making it a little easier for law enforcement to file these petitions to temporarily take firearms. Another bill that our colleague Matthew Narvaez has written about giving the state a little more police powers when it comes to enforcing cannabis regulations and laws. And that bill advanced out of its second committee on a unanimous vote yesterday. So seems to have some pretty good momentum going to the floor.
Yeah. And we've got a ton of bills introduced. I was just checking this morning, and there's been 688 bills filed so far, which is a whopping number. We have about a week left to go before the deadline introduction, which is February 20th. But there are still chances for dummy bills to get introduced, which is kind of a way for lawmakers to reintroduce something that maybe got held up in committee.
Yeah, we'll see if we hit that 1,000 bill mark by next week. My guess would be we would hit that. But certainly a lot of bills. I always have, trying to remember all these bill numbers, and then by the next year's session, they're totally gone and lost to the oblivion of my memory. But a lot of bills flying, as you mentioned. I'd expect to see hundreds more before. I think next Thursday or Wednesday is the bill filing deadline. So.
In the last 60-day session in 2023, it was over 1,000 bills, and only a little more than 200 got signed into law. So we're going to see a ton of bills come through, but obviously not all of them are going to make it to the governor's desk.
Yeah. And these dummy bills that you mentioned is always one of I think the more interesting things about the session. These are bills that are kind of introduced as placeholders without a specific name, just for the public peace, health, and welfare. But then they can be amended if they get that one bill gets stuck and they need to kind of amend a new bill and kind of set it on a different chart. So I know some people don't like the dummy bill term and prefer the generic bills, but I've always still stuck with dummy bills. It's one of the endearing things I think about our state government system.
Yeah, and a good example of that was last year with the strategic water supply, which we're seeing again this year. But last year, it was introduced with a $500 million allocation request that got stripped out. So they brought it back in the form of a dummy bill with $100 million. That still didn't make it. So, it's a way. Well, we're seeing the bill is still coming up this year. It's got a $75 million allocation request, and sounds like some changes have been made in committee with it. They are introducing a committee substitute just this morning. We'll see how that goes. I know they are wanting to change a few of the taxes on produced water barrels, but we'll see how it goes. That's a controversial one.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for those dummy bills. They're the ones usually with the highest bill numbers. We hope you keep following our coverage at ab2journal.com and in the paper. Certainly things are going to keep being busy at the Roundhouse, and I'd expect to have a few more kind of later evenings as we start approaching the midway part of the session. But thanks to everyone for tuning in and following along with our coverage.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. You can find these episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.